Thanks for the introduction. I'm Kate Webb. I'm Head of Policy and Research at Shelter. This is the third conference I've been at in the last couple of weeks about kind of what should we do, and I'm kind of struggling at the moment not to just like have a tantrum and throw myself down on the podium, because I'm kind of damned if I know what we should do at the moment, to be honest. I think the election felt like a really positive period going into it, when we sort of had political consensus around some really surprising things, like the need for CPO reform and the need to return to building council homes. And like many people who work in the lobbying arena, I'm still trying to process what on earth it means now that we have a minority government. I think the big concern is that we've lost an awful lot of momentum, and certainly some of the people at Number 10 who we're having really interesting conversations with and were the ones with the really sensible ideas have gone, as is always the way after elections. So I think it's just sort of a plea, strike a moan at the moment about we have to keep housing on the political agenda. I think there's a real big concern that actually the difficult things will just be pushed to one side because there are other difficult things to focus on. So there's just a note of despondency about that. And I also feel I can't get away, particularly as it's not the focus of my presentation, but I can't get away from kind of referencing the terrible events at Grenfell and just how much that has overshadowed the housing debate, certainly for Shelter in recent weeks. We've had staff on the ground from kind of day one, essentially. And I don't think any of us have worked in a situation like this, where you're dealing with what is essentially acute disaster relief and dealing with deeply, deeply traumatized people. And I think, like a lot of my colleagues, I feel like I don't have any space left in my brain for anything else at the moment. So that's basically an apology for the fact that I might be a bit of a crap speaker. The second apology, because I'm going to get them all in advance, is I'm going to lose negativity and talk to you about a shiny new idea that Shelter launched earlier in the spring called New Civic House Building. And it is genuinely exciting. It's about how can we just build differently. So it's not just about talking about tenure, it's not just talking about Greenbelt versus Brownfield and that kind of thing. It's how can we turn the whole thing upside down and build good quality, beautiful, affordable homes. So it's great. One of the reasons it's great is because I didn't write it. So my second apology is that I will be flying a little bit blind on some of the questions. Unfortunately, one of the author is on sabbatical and the other one got poached by the government because it was so good. So you're stuck with me. So I think, as we all know, I don't think anyone can claim that the current model of building houses in this country is working. It's working very well for developers. It's giving them very, very healthy profits. And I don't say that with any sense of chippiness. That's what it's supposed to do. But the model, while it works well for those developers, it just isn't producing the number of homes we need. It's certainly not producing them at a price that people can afford. And actually, I think we're all becoming increasingly aware of the concerns around quality as well, and emerging issues around leasehold and ongoing costs and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's hugely controversial to say that what we've currently got ain't great. I think one of the key features of the current system that we're really interested in is actually the starting blocks of developers getting that land. Land, as we'll all know, is a limited resource. You are restricted in terms of what you can develop from can you get your hands on land that can get residential property planning permission. And the way that we sell and trade land in England kind of bakes in a lot of the problems from the get-go. You are basically, as a developer, incentivized to bid the maximum you can, because that means that you will get the land. And in bidding the maximum you can, you have to assume that you will be able to sell the homes as expensive as you possibly can, which does mean potentially squeezing on quality, squeezing on affordability, and maximizing numbers by squeezing on space standards. So we have a system which sort of rewards not so much failure, but rewards poor standards. You will get the land if you can pay over the odds and develop potentially poor quality. And the benefits of that are hugely concentrated in the landowner, who's got a life-changing sum of money, in some cases just for kind of selling a field. It's good for the developer, although there are alternatives that could be better, but it's not great for consumers. It's not really working for them. So what can we do differently? Well, recent government years have been very, very much focused on planning liberalisation, particularly under Cameron and Osborne. You saw this real belief that if you just liberalise the planning system, somehow volume would follow. I think we know now that that wasn't true. The number of homes built is still lagging around. Planning permissions, you have developers complaining that they can't actually get the construction skills and materials to deliver the volumes that they're promised. And it just seems to have been a bit of a red herring, this focus on just ripping up the planning legislation. Also, I don't think anyone really means it. One of our kind of longest lasting planning rules is, of course, the green belt, and it's still considered political suicide to admit that the green belt, particularly if it's in your area, might need to be reviewed. So liberalising planning hasn't really worked, and also our heart isn't in it either. Other alternatives are public subsidy. This has actually been something we're relying on hugely in recent decades, particularly for the type of client Shelter sees at the lower end of the market. If you're on a low income, we've basically given up thinking we should build genuinely affordable homes for you. And we decided for years and years and years that the political solution should just be to give you housing benefit instead. We all saw that what that resulted in the last few years. It's resulted in cuts to housing benefit as that bill was suddenly deemed unsustainable and rising homelessness as a result. The other big tool which has become increasingly popular in recent years is, of course, Help to Buy, which really, whilst helping a few people kind of get over the line into home ownership, has been hugely expensive and sort of propped up the basic kind of industry rather than really tackling some of the problems within it. So what do we propose instead? Well, what Shelter is calling for is a model that we're calling new civic house building, with an emphasis on the civic. It's not an entirely new idea. It's actually building on the heritage of things like the Garden Cities, so Letchworth, Welwyn. It's also the model that built towns like Edinburgh Newtown and Bath. But what it is really is just a new way of building, which is about sharing the benefits rather than just enriching landowners and developers and not really thinking enough about the kind of community payoff. So what is it that we kind of mean? What is it that we're looking for to know that something fits the new civic house building model? First of all, it needs to start with a clear vision of high quality development. This isn't just about squeezing homes on a site as it becomes available. It's about thinking about what would good quality homes look like that meet the needs of this community. It's about delivering this through a focused delivery agency which is committed to actually getting the homes built. And good examples of this are the Olympic Legacy Corporation, which has managed to build an awful lot of homes on the Olympic Park. Crucially, and this is potentially the most important bit, it's about getting land at low enough prices so you can actually afford to build affordable housing and you can afford to build quality housing rather than having to put all of your kind of potential money into the sale of the land. It's about patient long-term finance, so changing the way some landowners think about the transaction, not just having it being about that one-off windfall. Similar to point one, it's about a design process that directly involves the community. What do people want? What do they think that is needed in their local area? What would make them feel comfortable with new developments? Because there has been actually a huge and not very well reported collapse in kind of typical NIMBY attitudes over the past kind of 5-7 years. I don't think any of us could claim that it's plain sailing to get a development through local opposition. And finally, you need these homes to be built by a diverse range of high-quality builders. I think there is, as I said in the beginning, mounting evidence that actually the quality of builds just isn't good enough. And we need to make the housing market like any other market, where we give the strong, we reform the approach that it's clear that if you build poor-quality homes, you won't be able to sell them. As I say, this isn't a new approach. It's something that other people have used. And Joseph Chamberlain, who was mayor of Birmingham, was a particularly big big fan of the approach, and I've just included this quote which kind of sums it up. It's not about profit, it's about community. We included this quote in the presentation partly because Theresa May's former chief of staff was a big fan of Joseph Chamberlain. Haven't updated the slides since the election. There you go. Need to find out who, I've completely forgotten his name. Barwell. We need to find out who Barwell's kind of political heroes are and adapt accordingly. So what would this look like in practice? I think one of the things which we're really interested in is how can we make better use of public land. There has been a big emphasis in recent years on just selling off public land, getting houses built. But the problem is if you rush to sell it off with the emphasis being on getting best value for the kind of taxpayer essentially, the risk is you just have expensive, poor quality houses built on it. So what we're really keen is to see local authorities and other public landowners invest in joint ventures so they have far more control over the type of housing that's built and crucially the affordability. Second big tool to explore is development corporations. And these could be really good tools if you're actually looking to develop a large site, putting together kind of several parcels of land, and really looking at the type of regeneration that we saw with the Olympic Park, which has been a good example of a kind of development corporation. I get the impression, and others will probably know better, that the GLA has gone slightly cooler towards the idea since Old Oak Common. But from our point of view, there's still lots to explore there. I think most sort of politically controversially, but crucially, we have to look at landowners' incentives. At the moment, there is no reason to bring your land forward for development if you know you can wait and get a higher price. We have to look at reforming CPO legislation to change the backstop that kind of underpins developers' thinking, and makes it clear that if you have never considered bringing your land forward for development and you've got no intention of developing on it, you can't then sell it at the price assuming it's going to be for residential development. It was really encouraging to see the Conservative manifesto actually talk about this in the run-up to the election. I have to be honest, I'm not sure what's going to happen to it now, and I think the fear is it is put into the too difficult box. Finally, in terms of kind of tools that could be done, Greenbelt is a big potential area where actually there's huge scope to capture the uplift in land value created by residential development. At the moment, if you're a farmer with a Greenbelt field, your assumption has to be that it won't be built on. If it could be, the land value changes enormously. Why can't we be capturing that increase in land value and putting it back into genuinely affordable, good quality homes rather than just having a kind of once in a lifetime windfall for the farmer? The Greenbelt, I think there's an increasing recognition that we do need to have a bit of a grown-up debate about what we do with it. I just saw someone say on Twitter, which is I completely agree with, it's the only policy which has existed for 60 years and is seen as completely sacrosanct. But I think people do have a kind of legitimate nervousness that if you kind of ripped up Greenbelt policy, you'll just see swathes of kind of barrack villages go up. Doing it via Greenbelt Community Trusts helps embed that feeling that this will be for community benefit and that it won't just be about enriching a farmer, enriching a developer, and that you will actually be building good quality developments that local people want to live in. So that is my whistle stop of kind of Shelter's big shiny idea to change the way we build.